So people are awake. Unlike me, I just woke up about 20 minutes ago and I did the normal rush to the studio, up the stairs, completely breathless and straight here on time every time. Of course, my studio producer, director, manager, all in one. We have 10 titles for her. She's doing great job, and she was here on time, just 2 minutes before me. And that's a competition we have every day. Who's going to get here first? So no doubt you can call us on 0116 482 2086, or you can call us on 077 055. So today we have another wonderful guest to join us, and we're going to allow her to introduce herself to you, all of you listening in right now. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. This is Dr. Saima Anise from across the Atlantic. I've been on the show for couple of years now. I think this is my second or third year, Zed, remind me. And we gather here today to address issues of specific significance and contemporary significance.
Of course, at Radio Ramadan, we are global. We have guests from different parts of the country. We've had a guest from Cairo, we've had a guest from UAE, we've had a guest from USA, and next year we're going to step up and go to Pakistan, to India, Bangladesh. So all of these countries, every one of us are working together, not only locally, nationally, but globally. So this is how the interaction is. And this whole week we have been working on EDI. Dr. Saima, are you familiar with EDI?
So yes, EDI to somebody's native ears sounds like equity, diversity, inclusion. If you jumble them up, it's the herald of the end of Ramadan. And if you turn it around a little bit more, it's DEI, as we like to call it in the US, diversity, equity, inclusion.
Of course, one listener told me yesterday that actually it should be inclusive, equality, and then diversity. It cannot be EDI, equality first. First, you got to be included, inclusion. So, of course, right now, I can only be thinking about the EID, which is the day of Eid. That's what I'm thinking about, EID, right? So what do you think about that?
Well, we're very close to the end of Ramadan, and, purposefully so, and then we should be celebrating.
Well, we're in the midst of the last 10 days, and every day is important. So all of you, make du'as, ask for forgiveness for me, for you, for your family, for everyone, and we can then all be good for it. So this is very important. Yesterday I was at an iftar with the brother Shaukat. He'd invited me, and it was the end of the Quran. We did a Quran khatam, and it was good to meet a lot of people who otherwise you did not see for the last 2.5 years due to COVID. So it was absolutely a good evening and brought you back to 2.5 years ago, which is the last time I saw most of them, and it was quite a good idea. What about you? What's been happening there? Have you been connecting with the community over there, with your friends, with your family during this period of COVID? Is the restrictions been lifted there?
For the most part, the mask mandate is in disarray. It was just announced that we could take masks off while traveling, although airlines retaliated. And there's some scuffle about the federal judge who called it because people are still feeling under the burden of and the onus of COVID still being present in our surroundings. However, on a more local level, people are still amazing. I was at an iftar last night that was organized by the local mosque at a huge venue, and there must have been about 200 or so people in there. But since the venue was large enough to accommodate everybody and more, it felt safe. So I think at this point, it's a matter of perception of how safe or unsafe you are and how life has returned to its a new normal that's being established for us. So it's all good. And, on a personal level, I like to mingle with smaller groups. of just family or a handful of friends. And that, knowing that people have been practicing prevention, you feel safer.
So it is quite busy everywhere throughout the world, but we mustn't forget our brothers and sisters in all of these war-torn countries who are not being able to have the iftars that we are having almost every day in Yemen, Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and all of these countries where we have absolute mayhem right now. And we must make du'as for them. And of course, another war has started again in Ukraine. And it seems like people are just so out of touch with humanity that the people who are busy manufacturing weapons to continue to fuel these wars, and absolutely it's beyond me that in 2022 this is the way we live. And who is responsible for that, Dr. Saima?
Well, you can't hold one person responsible. The other end of the story is that, physical wars such as those that are being fought may be a proxy to something that is inherent in society, which is a deep sense of frustration for the powers that be to kind of turn the world order around. And COVID has been a great excuse for doing so, it seems, under the garb of the frustration between, hardship and trade and taking over ports and all of the rest. Waging war against and forming a channel through geographies to get to the warmer waters so that they could fuel more trade and work on their economies that's just one of the proxies that is being fought for. And of course, there are other factors at play, but nevertheless, it is a very sad situation for those that are suffering and are involved directly or indirectly in it. And when we're sitting in our safe havens out here or in your country or other places, we must keep that in mind and empathize and try to help as much as we can, given that we're in that privileged position.
That is so very important. The key word there is help as much as we can, make a difference, be mad. And of course, we have a nominations here we require for all people who are doing good in the community or organizations who are doing good. For BBC Radio Leicester, who have got the Make a Difference campaign going on right now. And if you would like to nominate anybody, then call us here at the radio so we can start filling their nomination and send it to BBC Radio Leicester. So very important. Organizations or individuals who are making a difference in our society, then please let us know. And now we're going to go back to our topic, and is just a reminder somebody sent me, don't forget the hospital. Of course, thank you for that reminder. It is the justgiving.com/fundraising/Ramadan-radio. And what this is about is the Leicester Children's Hospital, which we have been supporting since 2020. And what's required here is some of your loose change. We need you to come forward and donate that money through Just Giving. And the hospital, children, Eid, all is connected, and they want some gifts. So what the radio is doing is raising funds for that. So we've not reached our target yet. We need to raise up to £3,000. I think we're about 2,300. So we've got £700 more to raise. So please do donate for that. And we'd be very grateful. Children in the hospital, they'll be very happy to receive gifts over the period of Eid. Dr. Saima, do you have anything like that happening in your backyard?
There are a lot of local organizations that work towards, charitable causes. I myself, for one, am promoting and spearheading one that will directly impact my alma mater in Pakistan, the Civil Hospital Karachi. We're hoping to equip the neurology department with a centrifuge that'll help them take out plasma for patients that need it for treatment. And it's a rather huge undertaking, but we're at our 25th year of graduation coming up next year, and I think we owe it to give back. So I'm motivating folks from my graduating class to do some good. It's high time. And other than that, in the community, there are very many individual and group-based efforts. Just today, I heard about one that is helping refugees coming in from different countries. When the last flights from Afghanistan touched base, was it under a year ago or something, and they landed on our airports, there were individuals and groups out there welcoming them, housing them, feeding them, clothing them. And, a lot of effort goes into all that kind of stuff. And now they're doing the same with Ukrainian people. And they want to change the terminology and not call them refugees and not call them, exiles. They want to call them assimilated. Assimilated people in our society.
So that's a new word, is it? Assimilated people. We have some assimilated people coming into the UK, but our government, they have found a brilliant idea that they've embarked upon, is to send them to a country called Rwanda. And Rwanda, they do very good coffee over there. So these assimilated people will be heading to Rwanda to drink some coffee. What's going on?
Tell us about that.
Well, what's happening is that there's different classes of refugees. There's A, B, C. And the refugees that are termed to enter England illegal, where businessmen are coining money out of that process, then they do not allow them into England. They just pack them up and send them to Rwanda. And this is to counteract the businessmen. They're called businessmen now. And I thought, these, how do you call these people businessmen? They don't pay taxes.
I wonder if the governments have something to do with incentivizing the process of shipping them off to Rwanda.
Well, what disappoints me is repeatedly I keep seeing on our press two people, is Lord Poppert and Priti Patel. And both of them, they had parents who also were refugees when they came into this country about 50 years ago. And it's absolutely absurd that they would even lend a hand or be part of that idea to be packing human beings away. It's absurd, absolutely. So now, following on from that topic, right, we're going to be discussing institutional systemic racism. Now, I'm prompted to speak by belief that institutional and systemic racism is all over the world. Would you elaborate on that?
It is. That it is. It's never fully acknowledged. It's much less addressed. It's after several experiences that inform my experience with these issues. I'm a colored woman, so to say, in a Western society. After a long time, I felt stifled, unheard, unvalidated, unsupported, and sometimes concerned for my well-being, not overtly, but covertly. And I had heard anecdotes from friends of mine who had then, at this point, had actually left these shores for their homelands and beyond, that they had suffered overt racism and overt discrimination. And there were major factors that played a part in their decision to do with where they were working, their communities. And it might have been also, the unprecedented times that they had survived or not survived those instances. For instance, a big time frame had been post 9/11 in the US. And not to politicize the issue at all, but it has been a reality and only come to light after so many years, how many lives were impacted by that in more ways than one. So, I think it's prevalent. It's like a insidious disease that needs to be addressed. And at least in the Western Hemisphere, they've come up with the mnemonic EID, as we would like to call it. So it makes us think of something more positive. But basically, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or DEI, as we call it in the US.
Well, people are going to be so confused. they're going to say DEI, EDI, and they're only going to be concerned about EID, which I said earlier on is EID. Right now, that's all that is on their mind. But we say that diversity is the presence of difference that may include race, gender, religion, your sexual orientation, your ethnicity, your nationality, your social status, and much more. Language, of course, disability, age, religious affiliations, and your political perspectives. Your commitments to all these matters is absolutely crucial. Your understanding of all of this is absolutely crucial. At what age do we start teaching children about these facts?
I think children are subconsciously or unconsciously taking in the fact that they're living in a cultured and sensitized setup or society within their communal groups, say kindergartners or school children, and it's only once they're made to realize that there's a different setup or a class system or a social strata or a religious subset that differentiates them from others, is when they become aware and they become sensitized to the issue that there is the other. However, the other can be a welcome, positive thing, and not necessarily have to be a negative thing. So I can't vouch for the fact that at the current time it's being taught in school curricula at that level, but maybe it may become a trend at some point later on. But we certainly have workshops and graduate level curricula and institutional level, trainings that go on these issues, because they want people to assimilate as much as they can. They want people to include other people as much as they can. They want to promote equity, which is you promote justice and fairness, and you distribute resources within institutions and systems without any discrimination, and you address the root causes of the outcome of disparities and call it equitable.
So you mentioned inclusion just now, and we are jumping ahead of the game. And many of you listening in right now, do you feel that you are facing inclusion, or are you facing exclusion from your community, from your society, from wherever you're working, where you live? If you do have any comments, then call me and talk to me on that. So, Dr. Saima, we have all throughout the week met different people here in the city, and the guests have come in and they put forward a lot of interesting comments, opinions. And one of the young ladies was very interesting what she said. She said, throughout England, we live in a ghetto environment. Each city has 5 or 6 different areas, or we call them pockets, where different people are living. And they all live in their own bubble. So this is very important to understand. And I guess this is the way throughout the world. In fact, mindsets of human beings are such that they actually instigate, encourage, and promote that kind of living. And 50 years we have been here and we have seen nothing different.
Right, and inclusion is when you're truly inviting to all around you. You're not confining yourself to your bubble. So, say for instance, the city that I come from in the U.S., Philadelphia, is a neighborhood-based town, and it has its own subculture. And if you're sensitive enough to those subcultures, you are supposed to promote inclusion amongst those communities. And to a large extent, that is being done at the current time, also because the movement more recently for DEI or EID or EDI, whatever we might want to call it, originated from, more of a gender-based bias in the COVID era. There was an uprising, so to say, and demand for, one, assigning pronouns that's been going on, 2, a physical protest of sorts in the city during COVID times in the last 1 or 2 years, which actually led authorities to think and believe that this is something they need to pursue. The people were out on the streets protesting. And so the LGBTQ, which is the lesbian, transgender, gay community, wanted to feel included. The African American community for being politically correct, and then people of color, Latinos, Asian Americans, Hawaiian Americans, all of the others that make the city a melting pot. They wanted to be completely represented, not just in spheres of government and offices, but also just in regular everyday society, and be acknowledged and be celebrated for being themselves. So there's a large push here for that kind of acceptance. And very arguably, it's the first and most crucial stage to creating that community where all these different people can feel safe, they can feel valued. So I think that drive here is foremost, and it's we're almost like the stereotype or the for promoting DEI in the U.S. to some extent.
So inclusion, all of you, if you're at your workplace, think about this. Inclusion is an outcome to ensure that those that are diverse actually feel or are welcomed. So in your workplace, do you feel that you are welcomed? And all of you across the globe, everyone who's listening in right now, that it's a sad subject, really, to be honest with you. I've been talking about it every day, every week, throughout the week, and I haven't found any solution where somebody has given me a progressive example to say that this is the country where diversity in action, it works wholeheartedly. Now, do you have an example in your country? Your country is nearly 350 million population, and your country was created out of diversity.
It really was, and I think they're trying to set an example at the current time. In some states, they have given Eid as a holiday, as a holiday for all school students, especially Muslim students, so that they can rejoice and celebrate. And there's a push in other states to do the same. So we're not disappointed at all with that drive, and I think that's a clear example. For instance, like the neighboring state of New Jersey has that mandatorily accepted already. In Pennsylvania, we're pushing for the same in different school districts. There's a petition going around at the current time, and we're hopeful that that'll get approved.
Now, I go back again to a good example of EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, is the nursery and schools, the kindergarten schools, where they seem to be able to cope with it much better than the adult world. Now, I would say this goes across the world. Now, when a child is 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, he would have had to have infused a mindset by his parents at home for him to come to his nursery and to be totally creating an environment which would be counterproductive to the other children in their schools. So really, we need to try to work out all the preventive measures that we can think of. So here in the UK, we have the EDI officers or directors or a person employed to go out there and deal with these things. How can one person go out there to make that difference? So imagine you have 1,000 companies and they all employed one person to do that task, right? And you sit them all together, they will start having an issue themselves, between themselves, to find the right idea, the right policy. So I believe it's a subject where you have to really start at that nursery school and run it through primary. So by the time the children leave the primary school, they understand diversity, inclusion, equality much better than we do right now.
I would sort of partially disagree to this point, right? Because think about children. Little children don't develop concepts of abstraction of ideas until a lot later. I think maybe about 7 or 10 years or something. And abstraction refers to, these ideas such as cultural sensitivity and all, because children refer to other children as just children. They don't worry about color, caste, creed, race, who can be included, who can be excluded. Their ego is still in a very formative stage of development. So I think to that concept, we can preclude perhaps kindergartners and preschoolers and elementary school children, and basically focus our efforts on the current time on educating adults more on these issues. And so that's the drive that, at least the US has taken up in workplaces, in, higher school and graduate curricula. And I think it's being done to quite a bit of success.
Well, when you say the US, it takes me back to always remember that the USA were complicit in the slave trade and actually were promoting the separation of human beings. And they were running that system for how many years? Almost 200 plus years. They had created an environment which was totally against the values of humanity with the slavery. It wasn't until about 1860s, 1870s that they stopped doing that. And from that time onwards, 150 years now, they still cannot work together, live together, and can honestly believe that they are diverse. They're not.
Before we thrash my adopted country, isn't that historically a prevalent idea? Like, weren't we a colony of the Britishers in the 17 and 1800s?
Well,
and
we can
also come around our inadequacies and our prejudices that we were subjected to by people who governed us that weren't from us. So I think we've gone through very similar traumatic experiences.
I think
and
historically,
live and relive the trauma of it, right? So if there's slave trade in one place, we've also subjected our social classes to different setups.
The point here is that if we know our history, not only our history as a family tree or our worldwide history, and we can go back maybe 2,000 years, then we can come to learn, because we have to learn from the past to make it better today. Yesterday, if you don't know yesterday, you're not going to do good today, or certainly you're going to forget about tomorrow, because you have to shape a future for your children, for your grandchildren, right? Now, I want to remind you, in 1943, there's a town in England. I want to quote you one incident, but this is one of a million. There are millions and millions of incidents that have occurred throughout the world, but this one, when I was doing research on this week content, I was interested in one particular town in the north of England called Bamba Bridge. It really struck me because I lived around that area for a couple of years. And in that town, the American soldiers were there at the time of the Second World War. And there were white American soldiers and black American soldiers. Now, as you're aware, we have a very big culture. It's called the pub culture. So they all visit different pubs. And the white Americans would not allow the black American soldiers to come into a pub to have a drink. They would cause objections because in America, that system was rampant. The blacks were to the left, the whites were to the right. And big fights, a couple of people got killed, 32 people got reprimanded, and that was not even in America. Outside of their country, they exported this evil school of thought. Now, kindness of the people who lived in that town, what they did is all the pubs in that region, they put signs up there to say, blacks only, in solidarity for the black soldiers. So you can see 1943 is a long time ago, and even at that time, the seeds of destruction were practiced, planted, and in America, they were running that system. And so that was just happening here in England. But there are millions of incidents. If you do your research, you'll find so many incidents. And each one is not a pleasant one, Dr. Saima. So
Yeah, I can tell you something that happened here where President Clinton offered a presidential apology decades later in the 1930s. There was a Tuskegee, which is a town in Alabama. There was a syphilis study on only African American slaves, and they weren't taken an informed consent from, and that created furor over the years. There were settlements to be paid to the survivors' families. The last surviving person actually passed away in the 80s. Of the 90s, and then later on, there was a whole ruckus, and courts were involved, and a lot of legality, which led to realizing what injustice had been committed against these people, because not just giving them untested medication from the adverse effects that they suffered at the hands of this treatment, and then a lot of people died. So they finally did address that, because there was a furor from the Black community in the U.S. And the 70s had ushered that era in. And finally, President Clinton was more recently, in power, when he was around, he had to give up and give in, and there it was. And finally, after all this, we've had some huge instances just recently was the George Floyd case. You would be surprised that the Senate person who's also legal who fought his case was a Muslim African American lawyer, and he fought valiantly for the cause, and had him acquitted. George Floyd's family also is partially Muslim. We don't know if part of the prejudice that goes against people within the trial system, criminal defense system, is because of race, color, caste, creed, religion. But whatever it is prevalent still. And so it was a great victory for a whole bunch of population in the U.S. Just recently. And other such notable cases that are still going on. I don't have time to talk about all of them, but you just have to Google what's going on, and you'll understand that things so inherent and so insidious in our society that they're just coming to light through these issues. And so, really, if one is to say that in American lingo, if diversity was a slam dunk, inclusion is a bounce pass. So you basically need both working in tandem to win it.
So that is a comprehensive understanding of diversity. We keep reminding you, because I really, really want everybody to have a full understanding, full awareness of this particular matter. And in order for you to, each individual can make a difference. All of us have to be aware. It's when we're not aware, we're going to do absolutely nothing about this particular matter to make change for our children, for our grandchildren. So awareness is very important. All these historic incidents that have taken place, that George Floyd was a game changer. The Black Lives Matter emanated from that George Floyd incident.
Around the same time, yes.
Around the same time. Now, I'm always saying to people, it's all lives matter. Focus on that. And if you say Black Lives Matter, then you're saying, well, brown and white lives don't matter. All lives matter. So I always add to that, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And we have to have that mindset, ethnic diversity, all these matters, they have to be fully understood. And all of us, you will explain better, Dr. Saima, all of us are human beings. What is the makeup of our human bodies?
I mean, we're all flesh and blood, and we're all thriving or trying to coexist in a society that has all kinds of people, different backgrounds, diversity in that sense. And we bring in our biases, we bring in our culture, we bring in our thinking, we bring in our races, we bring in our gender identity. So we're bringing it together to make it more interesting, not to make it more difficult. And so if you view it that way, whether you're willing to admit or not, our different backgrounds and intersecting identities, they will show up. And to treasure that, to celebrate that, to make it respectful, You know, nowadays the drive is towards institutions to try to eliminate the systemic racism, to address that at that level, to actually appoint officers for that purpose. And so, the titles of diversity, equity, inclusion chiefs has come about. And so that is now a burgeoning and a booming industry in itself. And I think it's going to last because from the time that they started assigning gender pronouns to your titles, and when you sign off your signature on an email, say, for instance, we've come to a point where there's a chief diversity officer in a large healthcare system where I work. And we're not the only ones. But that says something.
Of course. Are you familiar with the HISR?
Tell me about it.
It's a historic, institutional, systemic racism.
Another one of your Zedisms.
No, this one is well set now. Everybody understands it like that much better. And we also have the historic, institutional, systemic alcoholism. So these are not things of new. They are historic. And from historic, they become institutionalized. And then the systemic part follows. So this doesn't apply to racism only. It applies to all these addictions that we have in our social disorder world. So when you are not inclusion, you don't understand inclusion, when you don't understand diversity, when you don't implement equality, you yourself are out of the system. And when you're out of the system, you go into a tribalistic mode. And then you are creating an us and them situation. And then I've got a problem.
There's covert hostility that may arise, but for the most part, it's a sense of prejudiced injustice, prejudices and injustice and biases. A little bit more subtle. It only exhibits, when a big health system such as mine appoints a diversity, equity, inclusion chief officer, and then they overlook the fact that most of these biases and these problems exist primarily within janitorial or food services, and those groups are the ones that remain underrepresented, and they are the ones that don't ever get on the path to full professionalism at any level. So that's how it emanates, and that's how it shows up, really. Not so much as on a war path, as you may. But yes, there is discontent and a narrative and a discourse that appears to come from there that then takes on mainstream. And it does bother us, but life still goes on despite, right? And then think about all the places in the world that are actually surviving, living and fighting a fight for survival, basic survival. And so beyond the food, clothing, shelter needs that, a lot of other countries, unfortunately, at the current time have to overcome, us in developed countries can talk about these issues, but we can also focus similar energies towards the larger issues at hand. That's just my opinion.
Okay,
and,
Dr. Saima, we have very little time, 6 minutes left only, and time is just flying by. And we're now going to talk about some solutions, right? We're talking about incentives for change, incentives to change. All the social groups everywhere, they are instrumental to create societal reform. They have to play a very large role in driving change. Change is not going to happen otherwise, right? If we want it better tomorrow, we better get our skates on today. So
the titular title, these title positions, it's an industry, and that coincides with the current social movement. And then you have these studies that come out. There's a 2015 article by McKinsey that said businesses who rank in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are more likely to have better financial returns and way above industry medians. So investing then became, or an ROI in these programs then becomes very lucrative, within a business's interest. And, they basically measure performance of an organization on a couple of things like Are they having an advantage in the talent that they're bringing in? Are their employees better satisfied? Is there better alignment with their customer base if they're a customer-focused industry? And are they basically making the right decisions and causing that innovative streak within their workplace to cause that diversity to show itself more in the solutions and ideas that they're coming up with? So these are some ways they measure success, in mainstream in the business and industry. Yet again, these are things to aspire to, and for a lot of bigger companies that are trending this way, these are the kinds of things they're implementing.
Well,
so it's all.
Let's move on to the companies, the businesses, the shops, everywhere where you are employing people, right? So how they have to understand and invest in these programs which are implemented throughout industry right now, and throughout the sports world they're implementing EDI officers and or DEI programs in your case in the USA. So within the business world, this diversity can be absolutely a positive thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, but I think you have more anecdotal information about the sports world, Zed, at this point, and you'll apprise us of what your personal effort at this.
Of course, over the last 2 years, did a lot of involvement in eye-opening incidents throughout the country in the cricket world and also the football world, and many things have been happening. And these are all companies who are involved. These EDI officers or DEI officers employed by companies, they will not succeed at all unless all the social groups, every single community, there is an A to Z of communities here in the city of Leicester, for example, Dr. Saima, A to Z. So from the letter A to the letter Z, there are people here in denominations from those particular countries, right? So you could be a white person coming from South Africa, for example, and you won't face the same issues on EDI as a black or a brown person that comes from there. Now, over the years, in your own country, the Asian Americans have faced a lot of discrimination. Sometimes people only talk about the black, but the Asian Americans are catching up with the black population, which is about 12% of America currently, isn't it? And the Asian population is catching up in numbers.
And to that effect, Zed, what is the English Cricket Board doing about this?
Well, they've also put their foot on the gas, as they say in England, and started to look at this in more detail. Like for the first time in the history of Lords at the cricket ground was a iftar event. And I will send you a video for that, where the first time ever a azan was recited there at iftar time, and it's a beautiful azan which you can share it with your friends and let the world know that change is imminent, change will happen. You just all got to get involved and get on that train of change. This is what
Correct.
we have to do. So,
and yeah, I would say my parting words here would be like a string of beads. It's our unique differences that make us so appealing and so attractive. And really, we wouldn't be as beautiful if we were all the same. It's the contrast and the asymmetry that makes all of this so worthwhile.
So let me take you all back. Let's look at a shop here on the road where we are transmitting radio from. That is where you see diversity, because when a shop is selling his products, he doesn't care on the 4 C's, the caste, color, creed, culture. He's only interested in the money going through his till. That is acceptance, isn't it? He accepts everybody to come through into that shop. So when it suits you, you take the money and you will tolerate diversity. But all of you larger companies, for you the advantage is talent acquisition, you have increased employee satisfaction, better alignment with your customer base, and so on. So we must follow this, and improve decision making and corporate innovation you will have in your business. So there is a lot of things to learn even for larger companies. Of course, they can call me and I can come and help them, Dr. Saima. If you need my assistance over there, you can call me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're always welcome over the seas.
So all of you listening in, more workplace diversity equals more diverse solutions, ideas and opinions. So we are coming to the end of the program, so I look forward to meeting you tomorrow at 8:45. Dr. Saima, if you can quickly say goodbye.